Hello, my name is Robert Tracone, and today is April 14, 2018. So I just ate a cheeseburger right now, and I'm going to be explaining what happens as the cheeseburger passes through my digestive system. There are a total of 8 steps that happen. The first is ingestion. This means I'll be taking the food into my body by swallowing it, but first the food will be entering my body through my mouth, where I'll begin to chew the food and break it down. The salivary glands, which are auxiliary digestive organs, also take part in this process, where my saliva will break down the food. The last part of this step is when I'm done chewing the cheeseburger, some of the food turns into somewhat of a ball, which is then called a bolus, which will then go into my throat region and first reach the pharynx. The pharynx will close off the trachea so that way the food does not go down my windpipe, which leads us to step 2, the esophagus. Now that we're entering step 2, all the functions have become autonomic. This means that it pretty much works on its own and I have no direct control over them. In step 2, the food goes through the esophagus, still breaking down, making its way by peristalsis to the stomach. We're now reaching step 3, which means the bolus is entering the stomach. Here in the stomach, this bolus is introduced to gastric acids that will further break down the food, separating any nutrients from it. After the bolus is broken down, we begin to enter step 4, which will be going into the small intestine. The small intestine is made up of 3 segments: the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum. Here in the small intestine, the food is further broken down. This is mostly happening in the duodenum. Peristalsis also occurs in the small intestine, which is constantly helping move the food along. The small intestine gets help from the pancreas, the liver, and the gallbladder, which provide bile to help break down the food further. The jejunum and the ileum start absorbing all of the nutrients from the food, carrying it into the bloodstream. The small intestine actually is the organ that absorbs a majority of the nutrients, where the stomach absorbs some of them. The leftover waste from the food leads us to step 5, which is the large intestine. In the large intestine, any water in the waste is absorbed and the concentration of stool occurs. Stool is the waste left over from the digestive process. The stool continues through the large intestine, where it then waits to be evacuated by the rectum, which is in step 7. But let's not jump ahead to step 7, let's go back to step 6. Step 6 is the appendix. Although some of us believe that the appendix has no purpose, and of course when it bursts it hurts really bad, and we wonder why it was there in the first place. Despite that common belief, it actually somewhat has a purpose. Vitamin K is produced in the appendix, and minor digestion occurs. So now when someone wants to tell you that the appendix is useless, you can give them the knowledge that it actually has somewhat of a purpose, even though it is a small purpose. So now going back to step 7, now that we've covered the appendix, is now the rectum. So the rectum is a chamber which connects the large intestine to the anus. The rectum gets the stool from the large intestine and stores it until it's ready to be evacuated. Once the stool enters the rectum, sensors within the rectum send messages to the brain, which then decides when the contents will be released, which leads us to our final step, which is the anus. This is the 8th step. Once the brain decides it is ready to evacuate the stool, the sphincters will relax and the rectum will contract, pushing the stool out of the anus, which concludes the digestive process. Thank you.